All right. Well, more people are coming in, but we'll start anyways. Um, Thanks, guys, for coming. This is a little weird for me. I've never done anything like this, so bear with me. Um, but I'm really glad that we're doing this and that we're getting together in this weird time. Um, Technology is insane, so it's really cool to connect with you guys. I don't get to do a whole lot of connecting with you students just because I'm behind the scenes, but I'm really excited to do this. And for the staff that's here too. Um, Glad to see you guys again. So just to introduce myself, I'm Brent. I do a lot of like graphic design and video work for students primarily. We have like a whole team of creatives, what we call the media arts team. There's like 12 of us, and we split our time between um, the adult weekend services, next gen, which is birth through high school, and then what we call adult ministries, so like missions and neighborhood groups and all that stuff. So I primarily work in junior high and high school, which makes me really excited to be with you guys today. And then I also invited a friend of mine. He's also a coworker who's going to speak into this a little bit too. His name is Zach Derr.
Hey guys.
He's also a really incredible designer. And the nice thing about being on a team like ours is you really get to learn a lot every day. People on our team have very different strengths and weaknesses, which makes it really helpful just to get opinions and to work off of each other and with each other. And so I know I'm really blessed to be on that team and to work with people like them. But for this, we just thought we'd connect with you guys and show you just kind of a little bit of our process. This isn't so much like a tutorial on Photoshop or any of the Creative Suite kind of things. There's lots of stuff out there for that. What this is more or less is just kind of our process, how we kind of create ideas and put them from our minds to the computer. And I honestly think that this can really really help with anyone who's creative, whether you're an artist, a designer, musician, anything in the creative realm. I'm hoping that this at least teaches you guys something. So yeah, we'll get into it. And Zach is going to interrupt me on occasion with his thoughts and ideas. So before we actually show you kind of projects and stuff that we've been working on, I just kind of want to break down my pre-process before I actually create anything. And it's just 3 steps. The first step is basically, I don't know if any of you saw Jake Mbacci's masterclass a couple weeks ago. He brought up something that was really interesting that I never really actually think about, but is very important in terms of just creating. Real quick, if I could just ask everyone to mute, which I think everyone is. That'd be awesome. Anyways, the first step is just to own your space. So just to create a space around you, a physical space around you that you want to create in, and just kind of fix your lighting, put on some music, whether that's outside or inside. You need to create a space that allows you the headspace to create. So that's number 1. And you can't really see my space, but it's kind of bare right now. Number 2 is just to seek inspiration. Seek inspiration anywhere you go. And That could be, you know, looking at a sunset or a sunrise. You see a billboard that looks really cool. You hear a song that you really like. Make a mental note of that. As a creative, in whatever you do, your mind is never shut off. So use that to your advantage. And then number 3, last but not least, is just to utilize your tools. So if you're, you know, working on a computer like me and Zach, you know, those tools might be like the Adobe Creative Suite, Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere, After Effects, that kind of stuff. If you're an artist, that could be, you know, a sketch pad, it could be an easel, or a musician, it could be your instrument. Just really know your tools well, and try and utilize them as much as you can. So now that we kind of, I don't know if Zach, if you have anything else before we actually dive into.
Yeah, I think out of those three things that you just said, the you know, your space, get your space in order, seeking inspiration, and then utilizing your tools. For me, I think inspiration, when it comes to creating things, inspiration is huge. You know, I think that's almost completely instrumental in whatever you're going to be creating, you know, is to find something that you think is great and try to recreate things about it in a way that's all your own. But, you know, following in the footsteps of artists who have done something for a long time and trying to emulate that, I think is super duper important.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, now that you bring that up, really there's nothing new under the sun. So obviously you don't want to straight up copy a work of art or a song or whatever. But you're always going to be inspired by something. You're always going to want to take elements and bits and pieces from certain things that you see or that you hear, and you want to incorporate that into your own work. And that is okay. I do that all the time. You'll notice in some of my work, if you really like dive deep into it, I get a lot of inspiration from a lot of people. I, you know, have subscriptions and tour a lot of websites and Pinterest and all that stuff just to really kind of get my brain sorted for when I start a project. So yeah, we'll kind of dive into some of the projects that we did. In fact, what's interesting is these projects that we're going to show you. Zach designed one, I designed one. We were going to debut these as series art right before we got quarantined. So no one's actually really have seen these. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to show you guys and kind of break down how we do it. So I'm going to share the screen here. All right. So this series is called Storyteller. It was for high school. It was going to debut about a month ago. And this is the art for it. It's a very different style than I normally work in. I was kind of brought out of my comfort zone a little bit with this. And what's really nice about being on a team like ours is specifically my boss really tries to bring the best out of you and really tries to make you do different things. And you always want to do that as a creative. You never want to stick to what's comfortable or necessarily like a style that you like. You always want to branch out and try new things. Otherwise, you're not going to learn. So that was this project for me. It was very different. And I'll kind of show you how I worked through that. And through this whole thing, I'm going to kind of break down kind of the 5 steps of design and how these 5 steps kind of build on each other in order to get to something that looks like this. So the first step is composition. You know, you want to figure out what you want to convey in the image that you're making or the song that you're creating. And you want to try and figure out how you're going to compose that idea into a frame, into an image. And so you start thinking about that really early, like what elements do you want in it? Where is it going? Is it, living on a website? Is it going on screens? Is it going to be in a video? Is it going to be printed? Are you painting it? Are you putting it on a computer? You got to think of all those things before you even start anything. And so composition is step one. Step two, obviously, is perhaps one of the most important aspects of any artwork or design, and that's color. So you really want to decide your color palette beforehand. Obviously, some things will change throughout the process. Maybe you'll come up with an idea and you'll be like, I don't really like this color. And it's okay to change it. Things change all the time in the creative process. But what I really like to do is try and figure out what color palette I want to use in order to convey what I want to convey. And so a helpful tool for me is to create color swatches. And one of the helpful tools out there is called Adobe Color. It's just the color.adobe.com. And what's really cool about that online tool is you can search a bunch of different color schemes, color patterns, how different colors work together, or how they don't work together. That's really helpful for when you're trying to research a project. If, say, you wanted to create a graphic that is beach themed, you could type that in to that online resource and it'll come up with a bunch of beach centered colors. You can also submit an image to that and it'll pull colors from that image. So if you like, a picture of a sunset, you can submit that. It'll pull those colors for you. And then you can use those in your color swatches. And then once you determine the colors, you pretty much want to stay within that. Because if you use too many colors, it's just going to look disjointed and it's going to look like a mess. So you really want to make sure that it's cohesive and that you like the palette that you're using. So then process number 3 is style. What kind of style do you want to use through whatever project you're creating? So is it minimalist? Is it like traditionalist, modern? Whatever that is, determine that before you actually start designing. So for instance, this series art is very modern, almost like Art Deco style, very kind of rigid edges, collage-like. So you want to determine that before you actually start working in on the project.
Yeah. Hey, Brent,
Yep.
Can you kind of tell us, with this kind of storyteller art, obviously the storyteller is the name of the series. Can you kind of explain the process in your imagery and how that speaks to the theme of storyteller?
Yeah. So like with any project, you want to determine what it is you want to communicate. And so with series art, our objective is to always try and communicate what the series is about. And so for the storyteller series, for 4 weeks, we were going to go through different parables in the Bible and kind of really expand upon what these parables mean. And so the meaning behind this art is we wanted it to be very kind of Jesus-centered, Jesus-focused. Obviously, because he is the master storyteller. He's the one that said all of these parables, gave all these parables. And so we really wanted to make him front and center, which we don't really do a whole lot. So we wanted to get imagery of him in the art. And then as I was kind of researching what exactly I wanted to do, I came across some styles that are very similar to what you see on your screen. kind of like a mishmash of different images and styles and pieces of art. So once I kind of got that idea, then I kind of dived a little deeper and was like, okay, what kind of Jesus style imagery do I want to use? So I knew that I wanted two pieces that were very, very different from one another. So one, as you can see, is like a watercolor, almost kind of oil painting look. And then one is just a sketch. And then from there, it's just kind of like how do you stitch it together to make it look like one image? And then the background kind of just built from there. It was more or less my thought process behind that was just like, you know, what did the environments in Jesus's time look like? And so that's actually the Sea of Galilee right here. And then we just kind of put it together. Color palette I took from the actual like Jesus imagery that I saw, and then we included some like teals and blues from the water.
Yeah. Do you happen to have any like any images that you actually pulled inspiration for this? Do you have any of that on you, or?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
Okay. Yeah, if you had it on hand, I was just to kind of see the similarities between it and your final product here.
Yeah, I do, but it's on my other computer, unfortunately. But I just did a lot of research on Google and different like stock photo websites, Getty Images, iStock, things like that. Those are very helpful tools in order to gain inspiration and even just get images that you really like that you want to manipulate into your art. So I looked through tons and tons and tons of, I mean, it probably took me a day just looking through Jesus artwork and images. I mean, at one point I even put like an actual live action image from the Passion of Christ in here, but it wasn't really what I was going for. I wanted more like of an artistic paint minimalist.
So, well, can I ask you about your font choice? I feel like that's something that a lot of designers struggle with, and me especially struggles with. I'm always asking you for a new font. So I think, just talk about your process when it comes to typeface.
Typeface is important. It's very important, especially with...
It'll make or break a graphic.
Yeah, especially with something like this, like series art or an advertisement or something where it's very kind of type forward. You obviously want to convey a clear message as to what this thing is, but you also want to theme it around to the style of your artwork. And so for this particular project, I kind of wanted that juxtaposition between old and new. So in the image itself, you can see a lot of like new styles with the clean lines, the kind of the map kind of pattern here, the clean imagery, like live imagery, but also the old school route with the actual Jesus imagery and the color palette. So I wanted something to kind of bridge that gap. So I probably looked through 30 different fonts to get to this one. I always knew that I wanted kind of like an old English thing look to it, almost like old newspaper style.
Yeah.
So what's funny about this one is we actually used this exact font in the adult series art for Warrior a couple weeks ago. So that was made before this one. And I was looking at that and I was like, I kind of like that font. That one was in all caps, so it looked a little different. But I found out what font it was, put it in here, and I really, really liked it. Usually, what happens is I will always start kind of with the art first And then that usually allows me, like the font will just speak to me through what the art is. Obviously, sometimes, when you're doing like, if the art is literally just type and maybe some like color and texture, you obviously, that's going to be your big point of contention is the font. But usually if it's something that looks like this, the font just kind of comes to me as I'm working on it. So, yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. So that's funny. I mean, typeface was the 5th process. So that's kind of the overall kind of design process that I always try to keep in the back of my mind when I am designing a project. So it's, composition, how are you going to fit that into a frame? Your color palette, how do you want to convey that image? Style, what kind of style do you want to use? The imagery is number 4. Like what kind of imagery do you want to use in it? Real, fake, art, just textures, whatever that is, determine that, get those things. And then process number 5 is typeface, is your font. So I try to keep it very simple. Me by nature, I'm very just minimalist. I don't like a lot of things going on. And so something like this is really, really cool to me, and it stands out because immediately your focus just kind of goes to the center, and that's what we want. You always want a focal point in your art, in your image. It's like the chorus of a song. It's just something that you gravitate to, and clearly conveys what the series is about. Zach, I know that.
Speaking of
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I know that you have art too that you wanted to show. Kind of in the same vein. This one was for high school. For March, I think we were going to do it in March until we got quarantined. Zach did one for junior high for the same time, and that one's really cool. I'll stop the screen here.
Great.
And as he's sharing that, just keep sharing your questions in the chat. We'll get to that at the end, and we'll just try and answer as many questions as you guys have.
Yeah,
I'll let you take it from here.
Great. So this is GOAT, Greatest of All Time series for junior high. So I think the intention behind the series was, if you could kind of fill in some of the blanks for me, Brent, it was kind of a vaguely basketball theme. They're going to talk about some of the greats of all time in the NBA, and talking and alluding how Jesus was the greatest of all time. So we've got a few interesting things that you'll probably notice. So I obviously I have a basketball in there. I've got a hoop down here in the corner, and some sweet kicks here. All kind of pulling towards that basketball theme. And then I just have some other textures. I've got this kind of graffiti texture here, and this basketball kind of rubber, pigskin texture. So that's kind of my imagery that Brent was talking about earlier. And kind of to throw it back to inspiration earlier, this was a huge this is a completely different graphic than I've ever designed. Usually a lot of the graphics that I make are very kind of text-based, like you said, Brent, where it's kind of like a big giant text kind of surrounded by some imagery. Whereas this one, the text is just as small as any of the other elements. It was hugely helpful for me to go online, and I actually looked up some brands, Adidas and Nike, and looked at some of their branding material for inspiration for imagery and colors. I pulled this color scheme, like Brent was talking about, palettes, a color palette earlier. So this is mine. This one here. So you can see where a lot of that color from. I ended up going with a little even more minimal. from my color palette. So I dropped a few of the colors. So I just went to basically a tritone here, 3 or 4 colors instead of all 6. But yeah, so that's what it looks like. That's what it ended up looking like. But I got inspiration heavily from an Adidas ad specifically that had this color palette and this kind of negative space on either side of this square of content here.
Nice. Do you kind of want to go like kind of dive deep into the actual structure of the image? I'll do this too with the storyteller art, but kind of how you composed it.
Yeah.
Like layers and all that jazz. So kind of getting more into the actual Photoshop aspect now.
Well, I'm not the proudest of my organizational skills on this particular project. Usually I am, but we were in a little bit of a crunch time for this one. So I do a great job of organizing here. We've got these top few layers here are basically my fine-tuning adjustments, so I won't start with those. And this is unfortunately what my square looks like. So a little bit of labeling down here, some colors. It is a mess. It is quite the mess.
I mean,
but
that's what it looks like. That's what happens.
That's what the creative process is, man. It's raw.
It's
just how it is. So here I'll talk about this one. So this is maybe that's not a good example. We'll do this one. So this is obviously just some big stripes here. I've got a mask over the stripes, and I can actually move the stripes independently of that little square section. So basically I can pull that everywhere. And that's kind of what I've done for most of these textures is I have a mask that is showing what portion of the actual image is going to be seen. And a lot of this was masking and trying to fit these patterns into each of these little squares. And a huge challenge for me throughout the whole thing was trying not to be too symmetrical with all of it, because I'd end up making 3 rows, just like 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, and everything would meet at perfect 4 corners, right angles, and it looked too neat, it looked too organized, and wasn't very special at all. So I had to be really, really intentional about making some of these boxes a little smaller, a little bigger, so that we have some of these consistencies here, and just trying to make it a little asymmetrical, so that we don't have a bunch of big block shapes. Which was challenging because it's a lot easier just to line things up really symmetrically.
One of the interesting things that you said, and I think it's probably one of the most important tools at your disposal in terms of working in Photoshop in a program like this, is masking. If you don't know what masking is, what it allows you to do is you can erase objects without actually erasing them. And that's very important because once you start working with lots and lots and lots of layers, you always want that opportunity to go back in case you don't like something, something's off, you accidentally moved something. You want to make sure that you still have the ability to go back in, erase the mask. Your entire layer is still intact, and you can move it around, reshape it, do whatever you want, instead of actually physically erasing the layer. And that's something I learned late in the game after many hard times in terms of creating. Masking is probably one of your best friends when it comes to working in Photoshop.
Yep.
Anything else that you want to talk through in this project? I mean, I really dig it.
You know,
It's
thank
one of
you,
those
thank
things
you.
that's
I
one
guess
of
I
those
could.
things that's funny. Like, we really wish that we could have shown these
Yeah, of
live and in
course.
person, but obviously, um, this whole COVID-19 thing happened, and we never got to show it. So
Indeed.
hopefully,
I
one day
will
we'll
say
revisit.
I'll give you a little. I'll give you a little anecdote on the kind of review process for me. So this isn't this is obviously the final image that we're looking at here, but there were several iterations before this, and on our team we have a kind of a system of checks and balances to make sure everything that we put out is tip top. So we are constantly asking our peers for review and asking people to give us a little criticism on our stuff like this. And so obviously they go through a few rounds of that before they end up final. So I will say this I originally had followed pretty closely to my inspiration. And in my inspiration, the Adidas logo was down here in this bottom left box, bottom left corner. And so that's where I ended up putting GOAT, was in the bottom left corner. And I, submitted it for review, and I was a little hesitant about keeping it in that bottom right corner. Because I felt like I was going to get the notes, hey, you should probably put that in the center or try to move it closer to the center. But I submitted it, and I got the note first thing. Let's see if we can move that GOAT to the center,
Yeah.
So, which, as I explained to you earlier, moving all of these things around is not super easy because you're dealing with a lot and a lot and a lot of layers and masks. And so it's not just as easy as clicking and dragging it into the corner and being like, well, that fits there perfectly now. It's if I move one thing, it's probably going to have to be reshaped, resized, which means everything else is going to have to be reshaped and resized, because that's just how this kind of a project is built.
Yeah.
So I got that note, and it probably took me a full day to Rubik's cube this thing out and put GOAT in the center. But after I did it, totally worth it. Makes a lot more sense for series art, and I actually like the choices that I made that I had to make because of that review. I had to make some of these shapes a little smaller, make some of them a little different, and I had to get rid of a few too. I had to end up deleting some, but I think that kind of overall just made this series art a lot better, a lot less busy. It's already pretty busy with all the textures and stuff, but yeah. And then something about the cross, just because I thought it'd be interesting to share. The cross layer here, I actually this kind of shadow, this harsh shadow underneath it, was a complete accident. It was actually supposed to look like this originally, or it was flush over the top of it like that. And as I was going through trying to move it, it ended up looking like that. And I just kind of clicked it and dragged, and I stopped it there, and I was like, okay, that works. And I really dig it actually now. It's probably my favorite part about this whole graphic now, is that happy little accident down there, to quote a legend. But it's yeah, so I guess that's all I can say on that.
Yeah, the review process is something that is very interesting in terms of like working professionally in a creative field, because obviously anything creative is subjective. So anytime that you've kind of made up your own opinion about something, you're going to die with that opinion. You're going to die hard, fall hard on your sword for that opinion. But usually, at least for me, what happens a lot, almost every time during a review process, is usually something else will spark something like another creative idea. So you need those opportunities in order to reframe whatever you're working on in order to just to keep improving it incrementally. But you also got to know just when to call it quits, because if I had my way, every project I work on for a month, because you're just never done with it. But at some point, you know, the deadline happens, and it's gotta.
Yep, it's got to be done. And I think like you were saying, it's really easy to, you know, sink 10, 15, 20 hours into a graphic and be looking at it that whole time. You know, you're just staring at this graphic, you're making it, you're molding it into the way that it is. And then to receive any sort of criticism on it, especially, you know, similar to my situation where I would have to completely redesign the box from the ground up to make that one simple change. You know, immediately that's like, this is going to suck. It's going to be a bummer. But like you said, you know, in that criticism, not only are you forced to get creative and forced to kind of sharpen yourself to get to that desired look, you're also just gaining perspective. You know, while I left it down in the corner, the title down in the corner, it's and some could argue, you know, like you said, subjective. Some could argue that might have looked better, might not have looked better, but to kind of learn through the process to get it back in the center there, you know, I had to make a bunch of mistakes and I had to learn a bunch. So, and I also gained the perspective of my peers and my boss, you know, as far as notes go. He got to show me what he wants to see out of a graphic like this, and I just got a step closer to figuring that out for myself, you know. So
yep. Sweet. Well, before we go to questions, there's actually a lot of good questions in here.
Sweet.
Zach, if you want to unshare your screen, I'll go back to the storyteller thing and we'll do one last deep dive.
Sweet.
All right. So, you know, very similar to Zach's art, it's something that, you know, like I kept saying, it's something that I haven't really done before. So it was just a learning process throughout this whole thing. Now, one of the things that Zach could probably attest to, and a lot of people know about me, is I'm very organized, and it drives me crazy when something isn't organized. So a lot of times when you open up,
looking at my project right there.
I wasn't going to say that, but you know,
it was tough for me. I wasn't ready.
No, you're very
ready
much
to let the world see that side of me.
You're very much like me when it comes to organization, and
I am.
Everyone is different. Trust me, there's people on our team that it drives me crazy when I open up a project.
We love them.
We love them. We love what they do.
We do.
But, you know, everyone has their creative process, and you got to be okay with it.
Yep.
But mine just happens to be organization. So you'll find a lot of that when you open up a project of mine. I like to label. I like to put things in folders so that, you know, this is actually like the perfect example because we never got to actually use it. So probably in the next year or two, we're going to come back to it. We're going to use it. So it's really nice for me, at least, when I open up a project or someone else like Zach is going to work on it separate from what I did, they can open it up, know where everything's at immediately, and go from there. And so
that would not be the case with the GOAT graphic here. I haven't seen it in a month and a half, and I barely recognize it.
Oh man, I mean, sometimes I'm the same way, but that's usually if it's a rush job. But yeah, so I'll just kind of go through each of these. So I like to keep different elements within their own kind of group or folder. So all the background elements here are in their own folders. So if I were to hide all of these and go one by one, you'd see just like a bunch of different objects. So the very first thing that I started on was actually the Jesus collage here. I'll come back to that, but that's the first thing that I started on. And then I worked on the background from there, because everything is sprouting out of the Jesus image. So you want to make sure you have that focal point first before you work on anything else. It's very similar to the goat type that you were working on. Got to figure out what your focal point is, and that's why it got moved into the middle of that graphic, because you want your eye to be drawn to that first. But anyway, so just very kind of geometric triangle shapes, and then each of the triangles, if I were to open some of them up, have some of their own elements. Some are just solid colors. Others have like actual imagery masked into them. And there we go with masks again. If I were to disable this, the whole image is there. Again, it's your best friend. You always want that. So use a mask whenever you can instead of actually physically erasing something. Yeah, this one has what we call like a topography texture, like a map, old style map texture. I thought that was really cool. I liked the juxtaposition of the wavy lines with the solid kind of jagged edges of the triangles. And it kind of plays off the clouds and then the water. That'll come back. Same with the circles. Again, just kind of different objects that complement each other. And then now we started going into real imagery. And so for this, I just kind of rotated the image and then freehanded, just made like a triangle out of it. And then same with the mountain over here. Obviously everything is like fanning out. Another triangle on top. And then a column. This was actually a last minute.
That was my idea.
That was your idea. Where did we find that?
It was Getty. I searched for like old like Corinthian columns and stuff.
That's right.
Because you were talking about the imagery of the Holy Lands. And I was actually lucky enough to go to the Holy Lands about a year ago. And something that I noticed all over there was a lot of really cool architecture, and these columns in particular were really cool.
Yep. Yeah, actually, this brings up another good point, is you always want to surround yourself with people that you trust, and you trust their ideas and their style and their eye or ear for whatever you're creating. And Zach's one of those people for me. So it was every time I usually work on a graphic, I'll usually show him and then my boss, Cameron, two incredible designers in their own right. And so I always try to get an opinion from them. And this was actually one thing that came out of that was we both felt like, Zach and I both felt like we were missing something. And then he had the idea of like, oh, what about like something biblical related, like an actual object versus just like a landscape. And then thought of the column and put it in. And same thing here, we masked it out of an actual image. I actually deleted that. That's not good. There we go. Don't want to do that. But yeah, I mean, just like Zach showed, if I were to move it, the mask would still be there. Yeah, we just painted around it. And then I added like this little reflection here. Like one of the hills that I die on is detail. So if that wasn't there, it would just look really kind of flat. Like you literally just put an image on top and call it done, which, would work for a project like this where everything else is just kind of laid on top of each other. But it just kind of adds that other extra element that no one's really going to notice. But it just allows the image to come alive, like it's actually there. Yeah, and then I put some like clouds on top. This is actually a Photoshop brush that I used. Brushes are also an incredible tool to use within Photoshop because you can paint patterns like glitch effects, clouds, any type of like paint or texture, brushes are very handy for something like that.
And I love what you did with the clouds too, because with an image like this, where it's a lot of different materials and images that didn't belong together organically, the clouds kind of tie them all together. It's a really good strategy in a composite image like this. It just kind of, you put the clouds on top of all of that, and it makes the column feel like it is there. It makes the clouds behind the mountain not feel so out of nowhere. It's all a little cohesive.
Yeah. And it allows you to believe more of what's going on here, because obviously the column is exaggerated. It's huge.
Right.
But when you put everything together, it works. And that's what a lot of what art is you just kind of throw things against a wall and see what works. And then you kind of manipulate it from there. And then, just to continue, I added some lines here. I don't know if you can really like notice, but I wanted something a little extra to kind of build out the definition of these harsh angled lines. So there's some more there. And then probably the main piece is this Jesus image. Like I said earlier, I went through probably at least 40 different images of Jesus to try and figure out the two that I wanted to stitch together. And the thing with that is you want to make sure that they're kind of in a similar position in relation to their space, so you can meld them together. Obviously here, he's got 3 arms, but that's abstract. And so I was kind of more going with his face and kind of his overall structure of the image. They kind of work together. Yeah. So if these two were put together, it would look like an actual image.
Yep.
So, so there's, Jesus there, masked him out in certain areas, because once I put them together, I didn't want his, I didn't want like certain aspects to bulge out in front of this other, or behind this other image. So like I removed his arm and his shoulder, stuff like that. And then I added this thing. This was actually something that we went back and forth on. The other nice thing about working on a team like ours is we also work with another group of creatives who are called the programming team. And what they do is they program the actual service elements for early kids, later kids, junior high, and high school. And so we work directly with them in order to create what you guys see in a service. And so the programming team came back after I initially showed this to them, and they were like, well, why did you cross out Jesus's eyes? Is that like an artistic thing? Like, why would you do that? And the reason why I did that was because literally the only reason was 3 eyes. I didn't want to see 3 eyes. And no matter how I worked the image, it never really came together in terms of the eye line. It never came together until I put that in there. And again, it just adds kind of like another aspect to the image, kind of like a declassified kind of thing. And I mean, stuff like that happens all the time where it's just stupid ideas. Like, it's like, this thing is not coming together unless I just scribble some lines on top of it. And then sometimes it works.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
And it looks great. It looks great.
It just kind of brings the two images more together than if it wasn't there. It would look really, like, you see like his nose peeking out. Yep. It just looks really weird. And then just added some splatter, some kind of like paint splatter, just to kind of give it more of that feel of, it's a painting, and we put it together. And then last but not least, the type. The type I use, I think
It
it's
is.
called Cabazon. And in fact, what's funny with this too is we started using this as a brand font for CCV students. So if you look like through our social accounts lately, we use probably 4 fonts in total: Helvetica, Cabazon, Gotham, and a font called Titling Gothic. It's like a really wide, bold, like title font.
That's what I use for Goat.
Yeah, that is what you use for Go. And stuff like that just happens organically, where you use something that you really like, and you're like, I think that'll work for other things. And that's how we just kind of get there. It's just like, what works best, and what you personally like stylistically. How can that morph into other ideas? And then just very simple on top of that, I really like playing with textures and noise and stuff like that. And what I mean by noise is like static noise. So I add that to a lot of my designs. And what it does is it just really allows, you to add some texture to an otherwise really flat image. I mean, if it wasn't there, no one would really notice, but it does add a certain like color depth to it that you wouldn't get if you didn't have it there.
It's a finisher. Yeah. It's just, similar to the clouds. It kind of just ties everything together. It gives, because otherwise you'd have, to get really technical, you'd have different looking resolutions, like
Right.
on the solid images, the solid triangles and stuff, that in kind of competition with the texture of the other real live action images, like putting that grain over the top of it, which is all the same size grain, kind of just brings it all, unifies it together.
Yep. Yeah, so that's just kind of like, our deep dive into these graphics. And probably the only other thing I'd speak into this, specifically in terms of our job when we're designing something like this, is we always have to try and keep in the back of our mind, whether we're making something for kids or for students or even for adults, is how many places are we going to utilize this art or this graphic? And a lot of times, you'll see a piece of art on a sign as you drive up on a campus. You'll notice it animated in a video. Zach and I do that a lot. You'll see that online, on a website, on Instagram, wherever it is. You got to figure out, how is this image going to translate into other elements, into other outside elements? So you really got to design with that in mind, because some things, will work as a still image, but won't work when you animate them. And so you got to really try and figure that out before you even start on the project. Like, where is this going? And how am I going to translate it to all these different things?
And that's why organization is such a huge, important thing when it comes to managing your project files. Like you've done an awesome job organizing your project file, because if you needed to animate this, you could pull every single little group out and have them all do their own thing in a really, really easy way. Whereas mine, the bad example, would be really, really tough to animate, because I have almost no structure in that folder, and lots of very specific masking things that wouldn't allow my animating process to be very simple. I'd have to basically go back and organize posthumously, and try and make sense of it all over again. So it really is a good practice to be organizing in your project as you go along, because you don't know how much time that's going to save you at the end if you end up doing something else with it, or even if you get notes and you need to edit it.
Well, we also have to, Zach and I have to keep in mind a lot of times too, is like, I might be designing the art, but I'm not going to be necessarily the one that then takes it to other places. I'm not going to be the one that's going to animate it. That's going to be someone else on our team. And so what I want to do is I want to make sure that the art is as straightforward and organized as possible for someone who did not work on it to open it up and really know where things are, break it down. Because it takes a lot of work from when you take an image that's still and translate it into an animated video. Because a lot of times,
Absolutely.
like for this, what we started on doing before we got quarantined, is we had to actually find different images for some of these things, because we couldn't find things as close to these as I would have liked. So sometimes the graphic changes a little bit when you're actually animating it.
Yep.
And you got to be okay with that too. And sometimes, other people will make audibles and calls, and that's just what happens when you're working in a creative field. And you got to be okay with that. And it took me a long time to learn, just to personally be okay with other people taking stuff that I worked really hard in creating and basically tearing it up and doing something different with it. I mean, a lot of times we'll do we'll revisit an idea, but someone else will do it. And so you got to be okay with accepting the fact they might make something better out of what you did. And that happens all the time creatively.
Yep.
So,
but it's good. It keeps you moving forward, keeps you growing and learning all the while. So let's get to questions, huh?
Yes. Questions. Got quite a bit, actually.
Awesome.
Let's see here. All right. Where do you guys go to find fonts is one that I got. Many places, actually. Probably one of the best free places that you can get fonts is a place called defont.com. I'll just type that into the chat here. It has tons and tons of fonts, easily downloadable. And Defont is usually, because they're all kind of like third party, I guess you would say, they're a little less quality, but there's more available to you. And they're really good for being free fonts. Another place that we use a lot is Adobe Fonts, just because, we already have that with our creative suite. I think they call it Typekit. And a lot of our like standard fonts like Gotham and Helvetica and all that stuff either comes with Photoshop or you can get it off Typekit. Do you have any other places?
The one that you told me about a little while ago was that Free Design Resources.
Oh yeah. That one's more of like actual like people crafting fonts. I'd have to get that website. I don't remember the website off the top of my head, but you can search on Google like free designer fonts and a bunch of really cool resources will pop up for you.
Yep.
From Caleb and Miranda, where do you regularly seek out inspiration? Social media, nature, etc. All of the above, honestly. I think a lot of where I just find inspiration is either going to the movies and looking at like advertisements for movies and movie posters and things like that, or social media. I think social media is huge in terms of finding inspiration and just letting inspiration come to you. And honestly, in our line of work too, other churches, I think there's huge value in trying to figure out what is working at other churches and how we can translate that to our audience. Because obviously many different churches reach different people, but a lot of churches are doing things right. And so we just want to try and figure out, okay, what are they doing right, and how can we translate that to what we're doing?
Yeah, I think I similarly get a lot of inspiration from social media and other things, but I think more specifically, like when it comes down to a project to project basis, you really have to find something similar to the kind of tone or theme that you're trying to emulate. So like for the goat graphic, it has athletic, sport, but still kind of modern, contemporary, artsy feel to it. So I went to a clothing line, a designing brand, Adidas, for that inspiration, because they're top of the line, world class in a lot of facets. So it's really really easy to pull from all sorts of places, but when you're trying to do a specific thing, it's easier to pull from that specific vein of tone. So I think I see a lot of that through a lot of designers and animators and people that I follow on YouTube. And the great thing about them is that often they will list the resources in their videos, like in the comment section, or they'll list or they'll have tutorials as well to follow, and it's just a lot of really good places to gain inspiration and to pick up skills as well.
Yep. A lot of times, I personally find inspiration too with the people that are around me. So, I mean, we have a lot of talented people that work on the creative teams at CCV. And so I am just surrounded by a bunch of inspiration, creative inspiration. So, utilize the people around you that are creative, that the stuff that they put out, use that as your inspiration as well.
Absolutely.
How do you deal with the project that you worked really hard on not getting approved, or if the approver has a lot of feedback that you don't agree with? Yeah, that happens a lot.
Very specific. It's a very specific question.
It is a very specific question. Obviously, like we've been saying over and over again, art, music, anything creative is subjective, and you got to work as a team. Specifically in our aspect, you got to work as a team to get to the point where everyone likes what is being put out.
Yep.
Like I've found time and time again, I'm never ever going to 100% put out what I originally wanted. It never really works out that way. Maybe once or twice. Usually it's a team effort. Things get morphed and melded and worked on for days, trying to figure out what's best for the audience. So usually, I know for me, like I know what the audience is, but more or less for me, I'm working towards what am I going to like? What am I going to like to look at? And what am I going to feel proud to put out there? But the teams around me are thinking about different aspects as to how this art is going to be utilized.
Which is why we have those people in those roles. We have leadership that's trusted and professional and knows exactly what they want to see. And so while we are sort of a mechanism that is creating this content, also have to be in correspondence with those people and making sure that like we're trying to serve their message as well as fulfilling our creative inspiration. And so it's all about trust between teams, between peers, all about trusting that we all have like the best in mind for each project that we work on, and knowing that what my idea of best may not be the same as Brent's or as anyone else's. So it's really about just trusting the people who we're delivering this content to and being like, okay, I think that the font could be different, or I think it could be bigger, or I think we could use this type of imagery. But because I trust you as, a fellow teammate and coworker, like I'm going to divert to you and try and meet you in the middle and try and deliver the content that you think is going to get the job done, essentially.
Yeah, and anytime you're working for someone or for like an organization for something, you're always going to have that where you're not always going to get your way, and you got to be okay with that. But at the same time, to not be afraid to stand your ground if you feel very strongly about something, because it is your baby. You did it. Let that be known and explain why. I think the biggest thing is you just got to explain why you came to a certain conclusion. And if you can explain it well, I've learned over the past couple years, the more you can explain it well, the more people tend to get on board with your vision.
Yep. We got another question from Annie. You guys use vector images all the time. Print billboards or posters. How do you avoid pixelated imagery? So I think this kind of goes to what Brent was saying about knowing right at the top of a project, knowing where your project is going. So for something like GOAT, I know that it's going to be mostly on screens. So it's going to be on screens in venues and maybe social media at the most. And so when creating it, I'm keeping that in mind. That it needs to be a minimum of this resolution, so that it's viable for screens. But for something like, say, a Christmas graphic or something, that's going to be not only on every screen that we're going to be sending it out to. It's also going to be printed out onto cards. It's going to be on canvases in the parking lots. It's going to be, wherever else. And so for projects like that, I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that these things could be printed and blown up to huge sizes all over the valley. So that's definitely something that we take into consideration at the top of a project, which, like I said, would be a lot more important for a Christmas graphic versus, say, a junior high series that's only going to be on screens.
Yeah, and I'd say, we don't necessarily, or I don't necessarily like to work exclusively with one or the other, pixelated or pixel-based imagery versus vector imagery. I like to use both, but it's just knowing, like Zach said, it's just knowing, where is it going to go. So usually with projects that I do, specifically series art, is I try to design it in a bigger canvas than what it's going to be presented on. So all the series art that I design is usually 4K resolution, which is twice the size as your standard like HD imagery. So that then allows me to resize it to whatever the needs are going to be. So it's just trying to figure out, where is it going to go, and can I design it big enough I can scale it down. You can't scale up, but you can scale down.
Yeah. Cool. Next question. Got from Brody. When do you consider a project to be finished? And he goes on to say he struggles with perfectionism. It's hard to say something's done. We could both sympathize with that, because we are both tend to lean towards the side of perfectionism and really want to bring a project to its full potential, its full realized potential. But deadlines really help not let that happen. So I think a huge thing for us, is that we do have these deadlines that are always going to hit us. And so we have X amount of time, and we got to make something as good as we can in that amount of time. So it's that really helps. I think like if you're just creating for your own sake, just to create, and you don't have a deadline, I'd say personally set a deadline for yourself. Give yourself some hard boundaries. Say to yourself, okay, I'm gonna post this on my Insta next week, so that's when it's got to be finished. But I think also asking for people's opinions is a huge piece in that, because if you're asking for the advice of your peers, people who are graphically minded, it's gonna help point you in the direction that'll feel a little more final than just it existing only in your eyes and in your head. If you're the only one that's ever seen this graphic or piece of art that you're making, and you're not getting any feedback on it, it's going to continue to feel like it's maybe not finished.
Yep. I don't have anything else to add to that. I think that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, just keep rolling along. I don't want to keep you guys here too long. Honor your time. Do you have a favorite thing that you've ever created for CCV students? It's a hard question. Recently, yes. And that it's actually multiple things that came together for one event, and that's the Night Zero content. We were working on that in a similar time frame with Christmas. So most other people were working on Christmas content and the New Year's content. And so I was kind of by myself doing this Night Zero stuff. And it's some of the most fun I've ever had creatively, just trying to come up with lyric videos and artwork and bumpers and tribe wars and all that stuff. Trying to figure out everything and have it all come together. And what's really rewarding is just to kind of watch it with people. So to sit there in the room and experience it with thousands and thousands of high schoolers was really fun.
Yep. I think for me personally, my favorite projects, the projects that I'm proudest of are the narrative series that we do. So things like The Party and Snitch are a real testament to the group effort that our team can do, and it's a really like, it's hard to explain how just expansive those projects are, but those are probably the thing that I'm most proud of, just because of how many moving parts there are and how long it does take them, and how fun it is to see them all come together in the end. So
what are 3 to 5 fundamental tools in Photoshop you'd recommend mastering? Figure out how to go through these quickly. Definitely masking. I think, again,
yep.
Masking is going to be your best friend when working in Photoshop, specifically, even After Effects. Masking is very, very, very important.
Huge. Yep.
So I'd recommend trying to master that. Something that's not really a tool, but something that you probably want to master when working in Photoshop or any creative program is your layer organization. Just trying to figure out where your layers fall, how they're constructed, how they're labeled. You really want to become a master at that. So then you can branch out and become better at other things in the program. I think probably the 2 other ones I'll say is brushes. Took me a long time to master that, or I'm not even mastered at that, but just utilizing them right and in the right way, and just figuring out like what you like. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of brushes available online, custom ones, and just to find ones that fit the project that you're working on is key. And then the last thing I would put out there is Photoshop Actions. Actions are great shortcuts when working in Photoshop. I don't have a lot of time to go into exactly what it is, but mainly, yeah, the gist of it is you can record doing specific tasks in Photoshop. Anyone can record doing specific tasks in Photoshop, and then they can save those, send them out, and those become actions. So you can download like a VHS texture action, and what that's going to do is you'll make your image, and then whatever you want to apply a VHS look to, you click on that action, you click apply, and it's going to automatically run through all of those different tools in order to get you to that final point to where it looks like it's a VHS texture. So it saves you the work from actually doing it yourself.
That's crazy.
Other people do it for you. And it's a really, really helpful tool, especially when you're in a bind and you want something to look a specific way, but you don't know how, or you have no time to do it yourself. It's really helpful. I'd research that and exactly what it does, because it's a very, very powerful tool.
Yes. Free design programs. Free design programs. That looks like Brody said Photopea is a good one. I personally used the Photoshop free trial. It's like a 30-day free trial. I think I did that 3 or 4 times before I discovered that students get a discount on Photoshop. So you can look into that. I'm not sure what that looks like nowadays, but I know that there is a student discount on Photoshop itself. So just Photoshop. I think there's probably a few out there that you can look into, maybe through your school or otherwise.
Yeah, another good one for social media in particular, or like little digital designs, is Canva. It's a really kind of intuitive online tool. But honestly, I've never really worked outside of Photoshop. I worked on that, in high school, and junior high when I first started wanting to do this. Our school was lucky enough to have that. So I never really have worked outside of Photoshop. So I wouldn't really know any appropriately parallel free programs.
Yeah.
Gabby, I feel attacked. Well, I mean, come on. Just kidding. We love you, Gabby.
Gabby's one of our coworkers. She's one of those people who we were talking about earlier, who has projects that we would maybe need to get into that aren't organized to the level of Brent Ray's projects per se. But we still love her very much.
In the same vein, she creates awesome stuff. If you guys have seen the Life Starts Now little music video after the Easter services, she did that, and it's incredible.
Yep, and I don't even want to imagine what her project looked like, but the final product speaks for itself. So kudos to Gabby.
Yeah, Gabby. Last question.
Where did you find the Jesus image?
Oh, I didn't even see that one. Where did I find them? I eventually got them off of Getty. So it's like it's a paid subscription that we have with Getty. They also have like iStock and things like that. But another powerful tool is pexels.com. I'll type it out here.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool free stock website for images. Yeah, and sometimes I'll just get things straight off of Google. If you're going to manipulate it enough, I say it's fine.
Yeah. There's also another place called Unsplash that is a really great resource for photographs. So it's all live action. It's all real. But it's you find a lot of really cool textures on there. I know I use textures from photographers on there all the time. And yeah, it's a great resource, high res downloads. So that's a great resource for free photos as well.
Yep. And then last question so far is, how do you make text look like metal? Many different ways. You can use brushes with like different like texture style brushes with like metal colors to achieve that. And of course, masking, like a lot of times, I'll mask text out and then put different textures and things in that mask. But sometimes you just find
layer styles.
Yes, layer styles. That's another thing that you should
There's a lot of
use
defaults that you can download, layer styles, and upload them to your Photoshop. And then there's also actions like Brent was talking about earlier. I'm sure there's some really good metal actions out there that would be awesome to use.
But I mean, a lot of times too is depending on whether you're like doing it 3D or just like a flat image. I'll just find a texture on a stock website or on Google. I'll download that and then I'll apply it to whatever.
Yeah, metal texture.
Yeah. So that's really helpful. Just find a texture that you like, put it into your document, and then mask it out to whatever object you want it on. So whether that's text, mask it out to your text. And then you have
masking.
You have immediate.
Learn how to mask.
Yep. You have immediate metal texture. All right.
Cool.
Just real quick, 3 things I kind of want to leave you with before we all head out, which I appreciate you guys coming here. It was really fun. There's just 3 post-design points that I have. And we've kind of already talked about it, but one is have a critical eye. Always look at your projects with a critical eye. Never get comfortable with what you're doing or you're not going to learn. I know I'm always learning.
And if you don't get out of your comfort zone, you're going to end up creating the same stuff over and over and over again.
Yep. And then number 2 is foster feedback, like we've been saying over and over again. Find people that you trust and just get feedback from them. I am available all the time. So if you want to, DM me on Instagram, I'll put that in here. Feel free to do that with any project. You can email me at the same time with anything that you're doing. Just, it doesn't have to be me. Just find someone that you trust, a friend, family member, whatever. And always ask for feedback, because that's how you're going to grow and that's how you're going to learn. And then finally, probably one of the most important things in any creative field is find a mentor. Find someone that is doing what you want to do, and ask them to help you. You can shadow them when we're allowed to get out of our homes again. Just find someone, again, that you trust, that you really want to speak into your life creatively, and utilize that person as best as you can. That's essentially all I have.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I think we really covered it.
One last thing from Brody, and then we'll sign off here. Up on your time. If you save the paint images as image files, you can just open up those images. Oh, he's just saying it.
I think he's giving advice to
Nice.
Alan.
All right, Brody.
Nice.
Listen
Community, helping each other out.
That's right.
It's great.
All right, guys. Well, again, just want to thank you all. This will be on YouTube along with Jake's music class. So if you have any friends or anything that wants to watch this later down the line, it'll be on there soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Have
you,
a
guys.
great day.